The story took place in 2012, in an old town district somewhere in the US, during the Mid-Autumn Festival. A woman was brutally murdered, her body showing multiple wounds. The event became an unforgettable memory for the local residents. After the incident, numerous rumors spread throughout the area, with some even saying that ghosts were too haunted by the tragic scene to linger. On the night of September 30, 2012, Mr. John, a resident of the Miller District in Charleston, South Carolina, called the local police to report his accidental discovery of a female body with multiple wounds and blood pooling around it. The body was found in a quiet alley, late at night, under the bright Mid-Autumn Festival moon. After receiving Mr. John's report, police officers from the Miller District Station quickly arrived at the scene. The flashing lights and sirens broke the silence of the night. Preliminary observations indicated the victim was a woman between 35 and 40 years old, dressed in a t-shirt and long pants. She had multiple deep stab wounds, but there were no signs of sexual assault. Her body was found lying on her back against a cement wall. The primary wounds were to her neck, chest and abdomen, which caused fatal hemorrhaging, making her death rapid. The scene was covered in blood, which had spread across the ground. The large area of blood seepage and the extent of the wounds indicated the attacker had been extremely ruthless, with a clear intent to kill. The forensic team estimated that the time of death was less than an hour before the authorities arrived. At the scene, police found a broken gold bracelet and a kitchen knife handle about 2 meters away from the body, though the blade was missing. The handle appeared old, leading police to believe it belonged to a kitchen knife. They speculated that the handle broke off during the attack due to the force used by the perpetrator. The missing blade suggested the attacker had taken it when fleeing the scene. Unfortunately, no clear fingerprints could be lifted from the knife handle. The technical team also found several domestic brand cigarette butts on the ground, which could provide important clues. They discovered bloody footprints and a distinct shoe print about 41 centimeters in length, likely belonging to a man of average build, approximately 1.7 meters tall. Based on the evidence, the police suspected this man to be the perpetrator. No signs of a struggle were found at the scene, suggesting that the victim had been caught off guard and was unable to resist. The victim's pockets were turned inside out, and no valuables were found on her body. Given the circumstances, the authorities speculated that this was a robbery, and the victim, a passerby, had been randomly targeted. Mr. John, the person who reported the body, stated that he had no prior knowledge of the victim and that he stumbled upon the scene while walking home through the alley. With no identification papers or personal belongings found on the victim, the police began questioning local residents. Fortunately, someone recognized the victim as Mary Sue Smith, a 38-year-old married woman. Although she didn't live in the area, she frequently visited a nearby shop, about 10 kilometers from the crime scene. Through further investigation, police quickly contacted the victim's husband, Mr. James Smith. Upon hearing the news of his wife's murder, James rushed to the scene in a state of shock and panic. He explained to the police that he had called his wife around 10 p.m., asking her to return home and rest. He never expected the devastating news that followed. James shared that both he and his wife had previously been through failed marriages, making him cherish their relationship even more. With a high income, he ensured that his wife didn't need to work. Instead, her daily routine consisted of taking care of the house, cooking meals, and spending her free time shopping and socializing with friends. James also informed the police that Mary frequently visited a nearby card-playing shop with her friends. The police then contacted the shop owner, Mr. Adam Brown, who confirmed that Mary was a regular customer. On the night of September 30th, she had been playing cards with a man and 2 women, and the group left around 10 p.m. One of the women, Ms. Lisa Brown, said that Mary had called her earlier that evening, saying she was bored and wanted to meet up. However, after playing for a short while, Mary suddenly declared that she was having an unlucky day and no longer felt like playing. Around 10 p.m., Mary received a phone call, which Ms. Cresson assumed was from a man, though she couldn't be sure. This call likely came from James, as he had called his wife around the same time to ask her to return home. After the phone call, Mary decided to leave. A male friend offered to drive her home, but she refused, saying she would take a taxi instead. Police later reviewed surveillance footage from nearby streets and found an image of Mary hailing a taxi at 10:25 p.m. Using the license plate information from the footage, police tracked down the taxi driver, Michael, who confirmed that he had indeed picked up a passenger named Mary Sue Smith that night. Michael was particularly impressed with Mary because her behavior at that time was quite unusual. The taxi had only moved a short distance when Mary received a phone call while chatting. Mary expressed frustration, speaking in a resentful manner, as if the other person had upset her. After moving just a short distance, Michael noticed her agitation. Mary suddenly asked Michael to turn the car back in the direction they had just come from and urged him to drive faster, as if she were in a hurry for something. Based on the information provided by the driver, the authorities began to piece together the clues. The sequence of events unfolded as follows. Mary Sue Smith was murdered in an alley near the front of a card-playing shop. The police believe that Mary's sudden request to turn back while in the taxi was related to her tragic fate. The person who called Mary while she was in the taxi became a prime suspect. The police quickly contacted the telecommunications department to review her recent call records. In the call log, investigators found a mysterious mobile number. The telecommunications records showed that on the night of the incident, Mary Sue Smith received a total of 3 calls, one at 10:02 p.m. from her husband, another at 9:45 p.m., which Mary did not answer, and the third, at 10:27 p.m., just 2 minutes after Mary got into the taxi. The number of this last call ended in 5570, and the call was brief. However, the telecommunications department confirmed that the phone number ending in 5570 had not been registered, presenting an obstacle to the investigation. The investigators turned to Mary's husband, hoping he could help identify the mysterious caller. When the police approached James, he carefully checked his phone contacts but found no number ending in 5570. However, after a moment, James suddenly remembered something. He told the police that the number 5570 seemed familiar to him. James opened his message list and showed the police that this same number had sent him several harassing text messages recently. The messages accused his wife of having an affair with another man. James admitted that he had been very busy with work recently and had neglected his wife, leading to some discord in their relationship. Mary had begun going out frequently, sometimes staying out all night without calling to inform him. Initially, James did not think his wife was unfaithful until he received the anonymous messages accusing her of cheating. He had tried calling the number that sent the messages, but each time the call either went unanswered or the phone was turned off. The authorities suspected that the person behind the number ending in 5570 was closely connected to Mary's murder. But who was this mysterious informant? While the police were still trying to untangle this mystery, an important clue emerged from a public investigation. A witness reported seeing a couple arguing in front of the card-playing shop at around 10:30 p.m. on the night of the incident. The witness observed the argument from a short distance and saw the couple gesturing at each other in a heated exchange. When shown a photo of the victim, the witness identified Mary as the woman in the argument. Unfortunately, the witness could not clearly identify the man, as his back was turned. The police speculated that this man might be the owner of the phone number ending in 5570. As the investigation deepened, they realized that no physical evidence from the crime scene, such as the gold bracelet or the kitchen knife handle, provided any useful leads. The DNA found belonged only to the victim, and the cigarette butts in the area had been there before the murder occurred. The local police expanded their investigation by interviewing the 3 people who played cards with Mary on the night of the incident. After thorough verification, the police confirmed that the 2 women who played with Mary returned home after leaving the shop and had no connection to the phone number ending in 5570. However, the police became suspicious of the male player in the group, David Johnson, a 38-year-old bachelor. David told the police that he had offered to give Mary a ride home that night, but she declined. He then drove home alone and only learned of her murder the next day. The police reviewed surveillance footage and found that David's car did not pass the intersection near the shop on the night of the incident. David explained that he took a shortcut that did not pass through areas with surveillance cameras. Though the authorities could not confirm the truth of his claim, they grew more suspicious when they learned that David had taken his car to be washed just 2 days after the murder. The police launched a thorough investigation into David's background and found that he owned a small clothing store in town. Mary had contributed capital to this store, making her a business partner. Residents near the shop said they often saw David and Mary walking together, appearing close, beyond just business partners. This led the authorities to consider the possibility that David was the man mentioned in the anonymous text to James Smith. Moreover, the police learned that David's clothing store had recently experienced financial difficulties. To verify the relationship between David and Mary, the investigators once again met with James to gather more information. James said that he was well aware of his wife Mary's investment in a clothing store with David. He had previously argued with her about this, but regarding the nature of the relationship between his wife and David, James admitted he was uncertain. James always trusted his wife completely and never suspected that her relationship with David extended beyond business. With the clues gathered so far, the police believed that the man mentioned in the anonymous message was likely David, but the real mystery was the person behind the phone number ending in 5570, which had called Mary on the night of the incident. Shortly after receiving that call, Mary had her fatal accident. Who was this mysterious caller? At the same time, investigators wondered whether the man seen arguing with Mary near the store, as described by the witness, was the same anonymous individual. While Tom hadn't clearly seen the man's face, he recognized similarities in the voice and build when compared with David. Based on this, the police suspected that David might be more involved than he admitted. Confronted by the police, David finally admitted that he did argue with Mary on the night of the incident. However, he vehemently denied killing her, insisting he had neither the motive nor the courage to commit such a crime. According to David's account, after the argument, he drove home alone, which took about 10 minutes. Once home, he received a debt collection call related to his clothing business, which had recently fallen into financial trouble. The conversation, he claimed, lasted nearly an hour, leaving him no time to commit the crime. The police verified David's phone records and confirmed that he did, indeed, have a long conversation that night. Despite this, the authorities remained suspicious of David due to his argument with Mary just before her death. He had a motive, his conflict with her, and the timeline seemed close enough to the murder. David explained that the argument began after he saw a call come in on Mary's phone from someone named Chris Jones. Mary had glanced at the caller ID but decided not to answer, which immediately aroused David's suspicion. When David asked who Chris was and why she ignored the call, Mary reacted angrily. David remembered that Mary had been involved with another man before and suspected Chris might be that man. The argument escalated, and they parted ways on bad terms. David insisted that this was the last time he saw her alive. Although David's story seemed plausible, the police still had doubts. They considered the possibility that David had planned the crime in advance. Perhaps he had staged his alibi by pretending to talk to the debt collector while using a different phone to contact Mary, luring her back to the scene of the murder. To further investigate, the police decided to delve deeper into David's personal connections, and at the same time, they began looking into Chris, the man David mentioned during the argument. On the third day after the incident, the local police visited Chris' house for questioning. Chris, a 41-year-old married security guard, confirmed that he had called Mary on the night of the incident to check on her, as they were friends. He said the call went unanswered, leaving him a bit disappointed. When the police asked about his relationship with Mary, Chris admitted that they occasionally played cards and had drinks together, though the contact had been infrequent. However, upon checking Chris's phone records, the police discovered that he had been in much more frequent contact with Mary than he let on. Confronted with this evidence, Chris broke down and confessed that he and Mary were romantically involved. He then handed over his phone, which contained many intimate messages between him and Mary. Chris provided an alibi for the night of the incident, stating that he had been at home watching TV with his wife and children, and his wife could vouch for him. However, Chris revealed something shocking. He had been receiving threatening messages about his affair with Mary. The sender had warned Chris to end the relationship or face dire consequences. These messages, it turned out, came from the same number ending in 5570. The police examined Chris's phone and were surprised to find that the mysterious 5570 number had been sending threatening texts to both Chris and James. They now believed that the owner of this number might be the key to solving the case. Chris also revealed that the person behind the 5570 number had once invited him to meet in person. Curious, Chris went to the designated location, only to find James waiting for him. Fearing his affair with Mary had been discovered, Chris panicked, thinking James was there to confront him. However, James, too, was confused. He told Chris that he had been contacted by the 5570 number and asked to meet at the same location. When the police questioned James, he confirmed this strange meeting with Chris. This new revelation made the investigation even more complicated. If Chris's account was true, David remained a strong suspect. But if David wasn't the person behind the 5570 number, then who was? Could James have orchestrated the anonymous messages as part of a ruse to throw the police off his trail? The police speculated that James might have staged the entire scenario, sending messages to himself and Chris to create an elaborate smokescreen. By directing attention away from himself, James could avoid suspicion. But there was a major flaw in this theory. If James were behind the 5570 number, why would Mary have responded the way she did when she received the call that night? If her own husband had called, she would likely have gone home or asked the taxi driver to take her back. Instead, she returned to the store. The investigation had reached a critical juncture. Was the mysterious 5570 number connected to David, James, or even Chris? Each of them had potential motives, but the truth remained elusive, and the fog of uncertainty around the case only deepened. Captain Nick of the Criminal Investigation Team felt he had overlooked some critical details, so he decided to rethink the events of the night of the incident, piecing together the clues. Here's a summary of the key points. Before the incident, there were 3 calls made to the victim, Mary. The first call came at 9:45 p.m. from her lover, Chris, but Mary didn't answer. The second call came at 10:02 p.m. from her husband, James, urging her to come home. At the time, Mary was playing cards with friends. She left the shop around 10:25 p.m. and got into a taxi. Before she could leave, Mary and her other lover, David, had a heated argument at the shop's entrance. David claimed he drove home afterward. At 10:27 p.m., while in the taxi, Mary received a call from a number ending in 5570. After the call, she got out of the car and returned to the area near the shop. Shortly after, she was found dead in an alley by a passerby who reported it to the police. Forensic evidence showed that her time of death was around 11 p.m. Between 10:27 p.m. and 11 p.m., no one knew what happened to Mary. The police identified 3 main suspects: David, who claimed he was on the phone with a creditor at home; Chris, who said he was watching TV with his family; and James, who said he was at home waiting for Mary. Captain Nick believed the killer was one of these 3, and that the killer had planted false clues to mislead the investigation. But who controlled the number ending in 5570? At this point, the investigators received a significant breakthrough. After several days of searching, they found Mary's handbag under a bridge, about 3 miles from the crime scene. Although the bag did not contain the murder weapon, a knife, it did have bloodstains and held Mary's cell phone and wallet, confirming her identity. Forensic analysis of the phone revealed fingerprints belonging to Chris, Mary's lover. This discovery contradicted Chris's previous statement, as it showed he had handled Mary's phone shortly before her death. The police quickly apprehended Chris, who was unusually calm when they arrived at his house, as though he had expected their arrival. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Chris finally confessed. Chris revealed that he had been the one controlling the number ending in 5570. The mystery behind his behavior became clearer as he explained his motives. He and Mary had been in a relationship for months, and she had long wanted to divorce James, but James refused, hoping to reconcile. Mary, desperate to force her husband's hand, asked Chris to anonymously inform James about her affair, hoping this would drive him to divorce her. Despite her plan, James ignored the anonymous messages and worked harder to restore his marriage. Meanwhile, Mary became romantically involved with David. Feeling betrayed and abandoned, Chris grew increasingly frustrated and tried multiple times to speak with Mary. On the night of the incident, after Mary ignored his call, Chris followed her to the shop. He saw her and David arguing. Waiting until David left, Chris called Mary using the 5570 number, and after a tense phone argument, Mary left the taxi and met him in a dark alley. There, they argued again, and Chris, in a fit of rage, pulled out a knife and stabbed her multiple times. He had given everything to her, abandoning his own family, only to be discarded. In his anger, Chris ended Mary's life. In 2013, a court in Raleigh, North Carolina sentenced Chris to life imprisonment for first-degree murder and the deprivation of civil rights. Though this case was rooted in Mary's affair, the tragedy deeply affected both families. Many have since reflected on how, when a marriage is beyond repair, it's better to pursue a peaceful divorce rather than resort to deceit and violence, as in this tragic case.